have many choices to make as we play varying roles and face many tasks, responsibilities, and challenges in our families, work lives, and group affiliations. But our lives become even more complex when we look beyond our nuclear families and the particular organizations to which we belong or have contact with on a regular basis. We all belong to an even larger organization that we call society. We coexist as a collective community of human beings, stretching beyond the boundaries of different towns and cities, counties and states, regions and nations. We are all citizens of the world, and as members of this social order, we confront profound choices about what citizenship means. To more closely examine the complexities of citizenship and to look at society realistically, inevitably, we will be confronted by a number of paradoxes. First among them is the paradox of good and evil. In one of his letters, the Apostle Paul wrote that this human society was ruled by principalities and powers, his phrase for the demonic. Whether we interpret the demonic as some external force or simply our human nature and original sin, the notion that the devil is the ruler of this world has an enormous amount of truth to it. Given the prevalence of war, genocide, poverty, starvation, gross inequality in the distribution of wealth, racism and sexism, despair and hopelessness, drug abuse, white-collar crime in our institutions, violent crime on our streets, and child and spousal abuse in our homes, evil seems to be the order of the day. The word Satan originally meant adversary. In Christian theology, Satan is also called the devil. We are being adversarial when we speak of playing the devil's advocate. Satan, or the devil, mythologically, was originally a good angel who was cast out of heaven for disobedience and pride and became the personification of evil and the adversary of man. A certain amount of adversarialism is good for our thinking and growth. The flippant practice of playing the devil's advocate, however, may hide a hint of the sinister. Any adversarial position which is persistently contrary and opposed to human growth, and directly opposite of that which is godly, contains the harsh ingredients for the perpetuation of evil. The word diabolic is derived from the Greek diaboline, meaning to throw apart, fragment, or compartmentalize. Among the most diabolic aspects of the fragmentation of our collective consciousness are those things so common that they have become institutionalized. Where institutionalized evils such as racism, sexism, ageism, and homophobia exist, for example, we find the dual mechanisms of oppression and dehumanization. When certain segments of humanity are systematically regarded as disposable or irrelevant or treated with derision, dire consequences for the integrity of the entire society are inevitable. Often, the forces of evil are more subtle than blatant. Almost as horrific as evil itself is the denial of it. As I wrote about in Search of Stones, many ride a train to work every day from their suburban havens to downtown New York City, never looking up from their newspapers as they pass the most impoverished sections of Harlem. The slums are rendered invisible, and so too are those enmeshed in them. On the other hand, there are those who take a cynical view of the world and seem to believe that evil lurks behind everything. Their vision is gloom and doom, even in the midst of innocence and beauty. They look for the worst in everything, never giving notice to that which is positive and life-affirming. When despair and cynicism are like demons to us, we risk perpetuating evil as well. If we are to look at our society realistically, we will recognize the powerful influences of both good and evil forces. The world is not all beautiful, neither is it all bad. Thus, a most critical challenge we face is developing the ability to gain and maintain a balanced perspective. While the prevailing Judeo-Christian view is that this is a good world somehow contaminated by evil, as a mostly middle-of-the-road Christian, my preferred view is that this is a naturally evil world somehow contaminated by goodness. We can look at children, for example, and rejoice in their innocence and spontaneity. But the fact is they are all born liars, cheats, thieves, and manipulators. So it's hardly remarkable that many children grow up to be adult liars, cheats, thieves, and manipulators. What's harder to explain is why so many people grow up to be good and honest. While capable of evil, human beings overall are often better than might be expected. In my experience with the community building workshop sponsored by FCE, I've been immensely impressed by what I've come to call the routine heroism of human beings. It is also common to discover how people in tragic circumstances, such as the Oklahoma City bombing and other crisis situations, rise to the occasion. There is abundant evidence of how people can be incredibly good when they are pulling together. There is a tendency among many, whether they are rich or poor, to habitually believe that they are entitled to something for nothing, or behave as if the world owes them, rather than the other way around. There are numerous reasons behind this seemingly pervasive attitude of entitlement. In Search of Stones, I cite one particularly American reason. It is the notion put forth by the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I believe these words are paradoxically perhaps the most profound and silliest words ever written. They constitute a magnificent and holy vision that accurately captures the essence of the human condition. At the same time, they are horribly misleading. We are all equal in the sight of God. Beyond that, however, we are utterly unequal. We have different gifts and liabilities, different genes, different languages and cultures, different values and styles of thinking, different personal histories, different levels of competence, and on and on. Indeed, humanity might properly be labeled the unequal species. The false notion of our equality propels us into the pretense of pseudo-community, the notion that everyone is the same. And when the pretense fails, as it must for any intimacy or authenticity, we are propelled to attempt to achieve equality by force, the force of gentle persuasion, followed by less and less gentle persuasion. We totally misinterpret our task. Society's task is not to establish equality. It is to develop systems that deal humanely with our inequality, systems that, within reason, celebrate and encourage diversity. The concept of human rights is central to the development of such systems, and I wholeheartedly applaud the Bill of Rights as it is generally interpreted by the courts. I am much more dubious, however, about the sweeping rights claimed by the Declaration of Independence, the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As I approach old age, for instance, I am increasingly dubious about my right to life in certain respects. As an author and teacher, I must question my liberty to lie or even subtly distort. As a psychiatrist and theologian, I'm not sure how worthy a pursuit of happiness is, knowing happiness to be either a side effect of some deeper pursuit or else the result of self-delusion. My still larger problem is with the aggregate of these rights. Add the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness together, and it sounds as if we have a right to peace, as if we are entitled to peace, without having to work for it. The same paradoxical principles hold true for achieving that much yearned-for condition called inner peace. Although we have the right to desire it, we are no more entitled to inner peace than outer peace. Yet many protest with indignation when life itself interrupts the happiness or serenity they have come to see as an entitlement. Moreover, in order to possess inner peace, we are frequently required to first be willing to forsake it. Only those who constantly lie to themselves without qualm can have peace of mind. But if we do not want to be self-brain damaged in this manner, we need to remember that there is something far more important than inner peace: integrity. Integrity, among other things, requires the willingness to endure discomfort for the sake of truth. We must be aware that there is a false kind of peace of mind that derives from being out of touch with ourselves. True inner peace requires us to be close and intimate with every facet of ourselves, to be not only invested in our rights, but also concerned about our responsibilities. Which brings us to the paradox of responsibility. As citizens, we are affected by a variety of issues at the local, state, and national levels. Depending upon the impact of these issues on our daily lives and the lives of others, different roles and responsibilities may be required of us. Some attempt to meet this challenge, to make a difference, by diligently voting in every local and national election. Others choose the route of participating in efforts to help those in need at a neighborhood community organization. Still others make financial contributions to support causes of interest and concern to them. But many resist taking any kind of responsibility. They find it easier to look to others to be the messiahs to solve all the world's problems. The paradox is that we are responsible for everything, and at the same time, we cannot be responsible for everything. The answer to this, and to all paradoxes, is not to run with only one side of the equation, but to embrace both sides of the truth. An unknown seamstress at a Montgomery, Alabama department store in 1955, Rosa Parks, unwittingly helped change our nation when her refusal to yield her bus seat to a white man triggered a boycott that lasted 381 days. Her feet tired and her dignity repeatedly tested, this 42-year-old black woman was arrested and subsequently fired from her job. Her simple action and subsequent actions on the parts of many others spurred a movement that led to tremendous legal reform in this country. Not everyone can have an impact at the same level as a Rosa Parks, but we each can take a stand in the struggle against all kinds of evil in our world. Indeed, the battle against evil begins at home. We must deal with ourselves and our families first, and work to create healthier communication and interactions. Think globally, act locally is a good guideline to follow in most cases. Beyond our own rights and standing up for our personhood, we need sometimes to be willing to take a stand on behalf of others, even when there seems no direct benefit to ourselves. Sometimes we must be willing to do so at our own risk. The responsibility for discerning when to go out on a limb is a choice that each individual must make based on what he or she is willing to give up for the sake of standing for something. There are times when we are truly in a bind about exactly where to draw lines of responsibility. In such cases, we need to do the best we can and then simply concede the rest to uncertainty. We will not always know for sure whether we could have done more, whether we should have spoken up when we heard a racial slur or intervened when we heard a neighbor verbally abusing his wife. In the face of complex and overwhelming social responsibilities, we need to remember that if we become gripped by despair and burnout, we will not only be useless to ourselves, but also to others. I have for years been consoled by an account of a patient of mine who attended a conference at which one of the Berrigan brothers, who have long been involved in radical civil disobedience on behalf of disarmament, was speaking. Someone asked Father Berrigan how he could continue over decades to do his work when it seemed to have no obvious results. He responded, "We don't even think about results. If we did, we would be dead by now. The results are not our concern. We just do what we think is right, what we feel we have to do, and leave the results up to God." We must choose not only the level of our involvement and our responsibility as citizens, but also consider the paradoxes of time and money. Deciding when to get involved is crucial, given both that we can never do everything we want to do in this life, and our own resources, whether time, energy, or money, are limited. Many significant contributions are made to society through the giving of time, money, or other resources on the strength of strong principles by individuals who regard their citizenship as a responsibility. Volunteerism is the word we use to describe efforts at trying to do good in spheres beyond personal economic interests and family. As soon as a person stands up for something with no expectations of reward, his involvement in a cause is essentially voluntary. A philanthropist volunteers his money. A teacher may provide free after-school tutoring to children in a poor neighborhood. A student may assist at a homeless shelter. A homemaker may make weekly visits to spend quality time with lonely residents at a home for the elderly. Just as time is important, other resources also make a difference in one's ability to serve society. Many misconstrue activism and thus reject it due to the simplistic notion that it is a call to radical poverty. Working for the good of society need not be synonymous with a total sacrifice of one's comfort. Some years ago, I read the proceedings of a conference of community activists in Nova Scotia. One of the speakers, who had spent many years on the front lines of social action and volunteerism, said, "The greatest contribution you can make to the poor is by not becoming one of them." This statement may seem harsh, but out of my own experience, it struck me in part at least as having the ring of truth. FCE, for instance, has been able to do its peacemaking and poverty work only because it is a financially solvent nonprofit organization. Part 3. The Other Side of Complexity. In the end, all things point to God. I said at the beginning that the organization of this book evolved from a single sentence, a quote attributed to Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr. "I don't give a fig for the simplicity on this side of complexity, but I would die for the simplicity on the other side." To journey to the other side of complexity, we are challenged to make a radical shift in thought. We are invited to move way beyond any simplistic understanding in order to consider what strict scientists might call the God theory. Let's explore the God theory and the scientific evidence, albeit most of it indirect, that seems to show that all things do indeed point to God. Scientific geniuses, including Carl Jung and Albert Einstein, have been among those who left the world a legacy through their works, which advanced the search for meaning in life and understanding of the universe. And both made personal proclamations that their scientific inquiries had led them to conclude that God is indeed real. But despite the assured observations of divinity from some of science's brightest minds, we still can't cite any scientific, specific proof to support the existence of God. Any proclamation about the existence of God brings about at least a bit of skepticism, and properly so, because it can't be proven by traditional scientific measures. The result, however, is an attitude on the part of many scientists, not only of skepticism, but outright rejection of anything that cannot be measured. But if we cannot capture or measure God, neither can we fully measure and capture light, gravity, or subatomic particles, despite their obvious existence. Indeed, in exploring such phenomena as the nature of light, electromagnetism, quantum mechanics, and relativity theory, physical science has matured over the past century to the point where it is increasingly recognized that at a certain level, reality is utterly paradoxical. Given the fact that God cannot be measured, many simply do not believe in her existence. Materialists and those who are highly secular require proof in the form of visible evidence. Basically, materialists live by a central belief that reality is only that which the five senses can detect. In other words, their motto is likely to be, "What you see is what you get." Secularism is a more complex phenomenon. Perhaps it can most simply be defined by comparing it with its opposite. This is what the theologian Michael Novak did so clearly when he distinguished between what he called the sacred consciousness and the secular consciousness. The individual with a secular consciousness essentially thinks that he is the center of the universe. Such people tend to be quite intelligent. They know full well that they are but one of 6 billion human beings scratching out an existence on the surface of a medium-sized planet that is a small fragment of a tiny solar system within a galaxy among countless galaxies, and that each of those other human beings also thinks that he is the center of the universe. Consequently, intelligent though they may be, people with a secular consciousness are prone to feel a bit lost within this hugeness, and, despite their centrality, to often experience a sense of meaninglessness and insignificance. The person with a sacred consciousness, on the other hand, does not think of himself as the center of the universe. For him, the center resides elsewhere, specifically in God, in the sacred. Yet with this lack of centrality, he is actually less likely to feel insignificant or meaningless than the secularist is, because he sees himself existing in relationship with that sacred other. And it is from this relationship that he derives his meaning and significance. Sometimes people fall in between, with one foot planted in sacred consciousness and the other in secular consciousness. Moreover, there are different types of secularism and religiosity. So part of the science of God is not only to consider that which is unexplainable to materialists, but also to come to terms with the fact that people are different in their relationship to God. To do so, it's necessary to clarify the difference between spirituality and religion. I have gradually come to restrict my definition of religion to that which involves an organized body of beliefs with a specific creed and membership boundaries. Spirituality is much broader And for my definition of it, I refer to the words that William James, in his classic work, The Varieties of Religious Experience, used to define religion: the attempt to be in harmony with an unseen order of things. For me, that covers everyone's spirituality or lack thereof. As a self-designated Christian, I personally not only believe that there is a higher power behind the visible order of things, but also that it is not neutral, that it actively wants us to be in harmony with it. Obviously, many people are religious but not spiritual, and vice versa. One of the most secular persons I've ever met was a Catholic nun with whom I worked for a year. She had been in a convent for 25 years and had no desire to be anything but a nun. Despite the fact that she did everything nuns do, confession and service to the community, for example, she gave virtually no thought to God in her daily life. Others are spiritual but not religious, and there are those who are a combination of both, as I am. Growing up in a primarily secular environment, my spiritual development was enabled by all the world's great religions, and it wasn't until age 43 that I was baptized non-denominationally as a Christian. With minor exceptions, I believe wholeheartedly in Christian doctrine. On the other hand, I also make use of the teachings of other great religions.